Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello and welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis and I'm your host. Today I have a great friend of mine. His name is Alex Vazquez. He is a realtor. He's many things, wears many hats, but I'll just give you the highlights and then we'll ask him about his trajectory. 33-year resident of Las Vegas, real estate team leader. He is executive board member of the Latin Chamber of Commerce, 3 times 40 under 40 top realtors by Young Professional Network. And most importantly, he is a family man. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, Louis. Appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure, man. You know, I've been getting a lot of questions from my clients about the new commission rules. So I'm like, who better to have here than you? You know, I already asked you these questions and, you know, the answer you gave me was amazing. And I was like, yeah, people need to know this, right? Because there's a lot of confusion. But before we get into all of that, I just want to know about you. How did you end up in real estate? And just give me a bit of your background.
Awesome. I started off in my professional career working in marketing and advertising. So I started off at first working in construction, went straight into the Las Vegas Review-Journal in the advertising department, then moved on to television. I was selling Univision, TV and radio and digital platforms, and then ended up in real estate. My neighbor across the street was worked for a large brokerage in the country, and she asked if she could introduce me to some of the people at that brokerage, and turned out to be one of the best decisions I've made. So that was in 2016. Listen, then only 3 years ago, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I transitioned from being like what is known as a solo agent, a solo realtor, to a team platform, a team leader.
Gotcha. And, you know, I love the background because I know that you've been able to use some of the skills you learned from the marketing advertising world and use that in your practice. You know, I see your videos on Instagram and they just look fabulous, man, like super professional. I feel like I'm in a TV set, you know, and you're like the host and you just like walking people through the property, talking about the neighborhood, everything is just amazing, you know, so congrats on that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So first of all, before we get even into the rules and everything, I wanted to ask you, what is really a realtor? Because, you know, a lot of people have a misconception that all realtors do is just open doors and like, hey, here you go, here's the kitchen, here's the bathroom. But I know that the roles go way beyond that, especially when you're working with a really good, seasoned professional realtor. So can you tell us just what are the roles of a real estate agent, both when they're representing a seller and when they're representing a buyer? You know, what are some of the things that you do? You know, is there like contract negotiation? Is there, you know, anything beyond just showing the properties?
Of course. And a realtor is a licensed real estate professional that is a member of the NAR, which is the National Association of Realtor, and subscribes to its code of ethics, right? So there's a certain rules that we must follow. Primarily when representing a client, whether they're a buyer or a seller, you need to look out for their fiduciary duty, right? Our fiduciary duty is to them. We are responsible to helping them make their best decision and putting their rights and their needs ahead of ours. As far as what we do for them, I guess really the most important part, I would say, is truly the negotiations, trying to get the best terms possible, whether they're buying or whether they're selling. But it's way more than just meeting with them, telling them about the communities, the areas, the type of properties they could purchase, sometimes making introductions to other real estate professionals in the lending world, title, inspectors, you name it, home warranty companies, is truly guiding them through what can be one of the most expensive purchases in their life, right? Or expensive sales in their life if they're selling their home. And also more stressful situations that they'll face, right? The moving component of it. So it's truly guiding them. It's looking out for the best interest. And in my opinion, negotiating is definitely one of the top priorities for us.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So let's say if I'm a buyer and I'm working with you and I want to put in an offer on a house, you know, you mentioned the word negotiating. Like what are some of the things that you might assist your buyer with when it comes to putting in that offer?
First and foremost, I mentioned this to our team all the time, is you got to call the other agent, right? You got to make some sort of connection with the other agent representing the seller. You want to build some rapport. You want to know what the seller is looking out for. And at the same time, discuss your buyer's needs. Whether, because it's not always about the money, we found out, right? It's Chris Voss is a gentleman that was a lead negotiator for the FBI for many years. I've seen him live a couple of times, and he says it really isn't about the price, or it isn't about some of the terms. It truly boils down to what's going to make both parties feel good. So, in my opinion, building rapport, finding out where the seller's at, where they need to be by when, and what their true situation is, and discussing our buyer's situation as well, and seeing how we can put that together. A lot of times, something very simple that our buyer can do means the world for the seller, right? Whether they're moving out of state, we have one right now where they're moving to Texas to be closer to family, and just giving them the lease back made all the difference. We had our offer accepted over 3 others just because we were willing to accommodate the seller's needs to make their life easier. And it didn't cost the buyer anything because they're in town. All they're going to do is when they close on the property, then they move in. But for the sellers to be able to have their funds and move to another state comfortably and not stressing out, they wanted to work with us.
Yeah, that's such an important point you make, that you use the word accommodate. And I like that because a lot of people, when they think of negotiations, they just think like the parties being adversaries and like, oh, I just want to get one over and get, the best possible deal for me, regardless of the outcome for you. But it's not necessarily the case, right? You're finding common ground. And like you said, it's not always about the price. Sometimes it's just accommodating one party based on their needs, right? Great example about someone moving out. So thank you for sharing that. So now I want to talk about, before we talk about the new changes, how were real estate agents typically compensated prior to the new rules?
Before, it was pretty straightforward. The MLS had a field marked in our system where we could see the percentage of commission offered by the seller, or a flat fee. It's always been negotiable, but it was just a number that was thrown out there. And still, again, outside of that, it could be negotiated. But most people just printed out that sheet, saw what that percentage was, looked at the sales price, and just made the calculations, right? That was pretty straightforward. Then you get into contract, you submit an offer. If it gets accepted, you open escrow. Escrow gets that percentage from that sheet. Escrow does the calculations based on the number of the sale times that percentage. And then they just sent out to both brokerages that amount, right? What the amount was for the buyer's agent, what the amount was for the seller's agent, done. That was really all it took. No, many times you weren't even speaking to the other agent about it.
Got it. So for example, and then typically this was paid by the seller, is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Right. So for simplicity purposes, if a house was on the market for $100,000 and the commission was 6,000 or 6%, right? It was $6,000 total that the seller was paying from their proceeds. And sometimes that commission would then be split between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. And the portion that goes to the buyer's agent was usually listed on the MLS. So you would know, like, okay, they're paying 3% to the buyer's agent. So basically they were splitting it in half, right?
Correct.
Got it. And what is the MLS, the multiple listing service?
So it's the Realtor side of the search engine for any properties in Las Vegas. That is the mothership, call it, and feeds off to the other real estate sites, which is like Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com, Homes.com. All of those feed from the MLS. So, but in our case, we must update everything constantly. As soon as we sell a house, we have less than 24 hours to put it under contract, right? We try to do it immediately, but you do have certain periods where you do need to update that information, because some of the other feeder websites, sometimes you'll see it as active, or it won't be updated in time. It'll take a little time. So we'll have clients taking screenshots. Hey, I want to see this house. It's under contract, or it just sold, but it still shows as pending on there. But for our system, we always are 99% of the time, I would say, is accurate.
Got it. And do all properties go listed on the MLS if they're for sale, or are there some private sales sometimes that aren't even listed?
You can do off-market deals. But for the most part, if you do have a listing agreement, it's in your client's best interest and your seller's best interest to put it out there, right? Because it feeds not just locally, but nationally and sometimes all over the world. So you do want to place it on there. And the only time it makes sense to do a private sale is if they have some sort of family situation. They don't want open houses. They just want to get out of the property quickly. Otherwise, you're really shooting yourself in the foot without putting yourself out there to millions of eyeballs potentially.
Yeah, you bring a great point, because I'm thinking, some people are like, well, I just want to do for sale by owner because, I don't want to pay a real estate agent commission, right? But it sounds like if they do that, number one, they're going to forego having nationwide audience, right, for their property by putting it on the MLS. And number two, they may not necessarily get the best deal for themselves, because I would imagine it's a lot harder. They don't have all the data of comparable sales and things like that, right? To be able to fairly say, here's how much I can get. And then they have to deal with the hassle of dealing with prospective buyers themselves all the time, right? As opposed to having someone on their corner.
And also, very importantly, Louis, something to note is the contracts and agreements, right? Because they are legally binding contracts. So they could put themselves in a very tough situation and lawsuits as well.
Got it. Yeah. That's a very good, important point. All right. Well, thank you for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense. So now I wanted to read two things directly from the National Association of Real Estate Agents, of Realtors website, to kind of say what the main changes are as a result of the new rules, which took effect this month in August, I believe August 17th. So the first one says, regarding compensation, it says, offers of compensation will be prohibited on the multiple listing service, the MLS. Offers of compensation will continue to be an option consumers can pursue off MLS through negotiation and consultation with real estate professionals. So that's the first change. So we're going to go into that. The second change is agents working with a buyer must enter into a written buyer agreement before the buyer can tour a home. The practice changes do not require an agency agreement or dictate any type of relationship. So let's talk about the first one. Well, now it sounds like, what's the difference now with the new rule regarding compensation?
So the way they worded it is funny, because they've always been negotiable. They're trying to hint to it. There's always been a negotiation part of that, but now you can't do it directly on the MLS, right? Now it's not publicized, if you will, anymore. Now it's very similar actually to commercial real estate, right? Because there's no MLS in commercial. So you're forced to pick up the phone and call the other agent and interact in order to be able to get that percentage of compensation or negotiate that. So when they transitioned this process into the MLS, for our team, it was very easy to adapt, just because we've always, number one, build rapport with the other party, know what's going on there, and ultimately start negotiating the best terms for your client and building in the negotiations around the concessions, right? That's the new word that they're using, is the real estate concessions, whether they're towards a closing cost, whether they're towards the other broker. It's always been negotiable, but now we make it more formal and it's open for negotiating back and forth.
Got it. So it sounds to me like, I think the reason this came about was due to a major lawsuit, right? Where they were basically saying that potentially, because before, when it was listed on the MLS and you, let's say as a buyer's agent, you can see the commission that was being paid, that they're basically saying that some real estate agents were incentivized to show properties that had the higher commission paid. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then this is a way for them to say, hey, we're not showing this anymore. So now, there's less likelihood of that happening. But in reality, you can still make a phone call and find out what the commission being paid by the seller is on that, correct?
Absolutely correct. And then now it's always really been up to the seller what they want to offer the other side. But we've seen, even in COVID, when real estate was crazy, right? Crazy markets, 25 offers on a single home. Sometimes they were putting $1 compensation in there. So again, it's always been negotiable, because from there, that was originally what they would put in the MLS. But then you could call and still work it out, right? You still put it on a document, have it approved by buyer and seller, and you move forward.
Okay, so for the most part, is it fair to say that as of now, at least, the system in terms of the seller being the one that pays the commission, for the most part, is still in place?
Correct. Absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. And this is also implied, as we've been told by some of our brokers and leaders, is truly the buyer is the one that's coming to the table with the money, right? He's the one securing either the financing or the cash in order to cause the sale to happen. So in reality, they're saying, isn't the buyer really the one that's bringing the money to make this work? But from the proceeds of the seller is typically what is offered to the buyer's agent. So that part of it really hasn't changed. But then again, it's always up for negotiating.
Yeah, I've had a lot of clients asking me like, "Oh, what does that mean now? Like, does that mean I have to pay a real estate agent out of pocket myself because, it's already expensive enough to pay for down payment, closing costs, and they feel like if they're misinterpreting the new rule, it's like, oh, we're going to have an additional cost now and come out of pocket to pay a real estate agent. So it sounds like for the most part, things are not changing. Just a matter of the real estate agent that you have having more conversations, picking up the phone, calling the other agent, and negotiating again, right?
True. And that part I think is beneficial to everybody, just because it's now you're forced to communicate, you're forced to interact, where before there's 17,000 agents in Las Vegas roughly, and many times it was all done through email, right? Or just texting. I mean, all the negotiation. I mean, there really wasn't any
crazy, right?
that would benefit your client, right? You're not doing your client, whether you're representing a buyer or seller, a favor by doing that. It's such a high ticket value that you're working with that I think it's fantastic that you're forced to communicate with the other party. It should have always been that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. So now let's go into the second part, which is that the agents working with a buyer must enter into a written agreement. What typically would that agreement entail? Like, is the buyer agreeing to pay money? Are they agreeing to work with you exclusively? What are some of the, is it legally binding? Like, what are some of the terms typically that you would see in those agreements?
In the ones currently?
Yeah.
Yeah. So before it was just pick up the phone, right? You can meet anybody there at a property, a buyer, tour them. You could spend maybe months touring them without any kind of written agreement. And then if they decided to part ways, and there was nothing you could do, right? However, now it's more professional. Again, very exciting, because as you're meeting with the client, you're building the rapport. You're truly having to follow a process now and explain to them how you're going to earn your compensation. At this point, we always mention just what we've been talking about the sellers still being able to offer compensation and us making the phone calls to negotiate that to avoid them any extra charges. Now, it's more official now in the sense that before we open the door, we're supposed to have one of two contracts. Either it's a one-day touring agreement, or you can define it and typically go 6 months or a year for that agreement. Many times you're not going to bond with that buyer, right? Which has happened. They don't feel that it's the right fit. That way, the one-day contract is great. It's truly a touring agreement where you maybe showing them 2-3 house or one new community or something, and deciding if you both are a good fit to work with each other. In those presentations, for example, our team and what we see in our network of agents across the country, we now always make sure that we do the buyer presentation. Hey, what are we going to do? Right? Everything we talked about a little earlier, from meeting them to scheduling the properties to making the negotiations, introducing them to lenders, inspectors, title companies to facilitate their sale. Now we really talk about the process instead of just saying, yeah, we're a realtor, we'll help you find a house. And, we'll figure it out as we go. Now you got to inform the buyer, which, again, my opinion is fantastic news. An informed buyer and working with a prepared real estate professional is just grounds for success.
Yeah. So it's more standardized, more professional process. It looks like there's more transparency as well. And are there any instances where a buyer would have to pay part of the commission or some sort of fee to the real estate agent?
There could be, again, open to negotiating. I'll give you a perfect example. Louis is new home builders. Sometimes are offering all the way up to 3%, but we've seen 1 or 2%. For example, in the 2%, if the buyer feels that their agent is worth 2.5%, say the builder pays 2%, and then that buyer agrees to pay that additional 0.5%. Those are the only times I've seen buyers pay additional out of pocket, is when a builder holds their ground and they say, hey, we're going to offer this compensation. But based on that presentation that we go through with the buyer, we say, hey, Mr. Miss, whatever their names are, and we just go through the list and we say, based on all of this, do you feel I'm worth, right, my percentage? And if they agree, hey, you are doing a lot, you're doing a great job, you're going to be spending a lot of time with us, working with us, we're okay to pay that additional percentage. Again,
Gotcha.
I haven't seen it more than 0.5%.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's not bad. And it's something that they would know up front, and you list all the services you're including. So now it's even, more transparent. It's not like you're just meeting someone at a property and opening the door, right? So that's really good. You mentioned new construction. So I wanted to talk about that as well, because right now we're living in historically, it's not really a high interest rate environment, but for recent memory purposes, people are like, whoa, 6.5% sounds crazy, because they're used to the 3% that they saw a few years ago during the pandemic, but that's not the norm. I've been in this industry for a long time, and I used to do mortgages back in the day, and it was more common to have 6.5, 7%, on your mortgage. Like 3%, that was unheard of, right? That was just like a glitch in the matrix, right? Just because rates were so low during the pandemic. But, some people feel like they've been kind of on the sidelines because they find it very hard, because sometimes you get both, a combination of higher rates and also there's not a lot of supply in certain markets. So the home prices are still higher, right? So new construction, for example, what are some of the benefits? You mentioned like some builders offer incentives for buying a new construction versus an existing home.
I'll give you a perfect example, because my team and I are representing a new home builder here in Las Vegas. The incentives talks about what they're offering to the buyer to make it work. In many cases, they're buying down the interest rate or offering additional incentives to upgrade the property. Adding appliances, adding blinds, furnishing the home, or paying HOAs up front. Just that they're aware that the buyer is coming, like you said earlier, out of pocket with a lot of money. And in order to get additional fees on top of that, appliances, furniture, blinds, it could really make or break the deal. So going with the new home builder, they already have in their workbook, in their numbers, budgeted to give incentives to the buyer, provide incentives to the buyer, to make it easier to facilitate their sale, really is what it is.
Got it. And I would imagine that because the home is new, there are some sort of warranties as well on certain things in the home.
That's correct. Typically, it's a 1 in 10 or a 2 in 10, depending on the builder. We call that the first year is bumper to bumper. Basically, anything is broken or damaged, you call them, they fix it. And then the 10-year structural, the roof, the ground, the foundation, right? Just the structure of the property is covered for up to 10 years. And again, the home warranty can be a part of the incentive, where the builder pays for it for 3 to 4 years ahead of time. So the buyer walks into a brand new home knowing that they have peace of mind that for the next 3 to 4 years, potentially they're covered and they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that gives you a lot of peace of mind. What about any financing incentives? The builders offer, like you mentioned, buying the rate down. Tell us about, I've seen like the 3-2-1 buy down loan, for example, if you just like the high overview of how that looks.
Absolutely. To give you an example, it's say the builder is offering $25,000 in incentives. In that case, the buyer can grab those $25,000 and play with those numbers along with the lender to see how it best protects them or helps them in their situation out. You mentioned rates being around 3.5%. 6.5%, I'm sorry. So if you take that 25,000, what the lender can do is accommodate those numbers and build them into 3 different years and the mortgage terms. So the first year they would really be paying 3.5% interest rate. Then it goes to 4.5 and 5.5 from those $25,000 that are offered by the builder. So that gives the buyer a lot of flexibility in being able to purchase that home and knowing what to expect for the next 3 years. And again, they're always able to refinance. And whenever they refinance, whatever money is pending, they can still use that either towards the refinance or to doing something else, cashing out later. So it's the buyer's money.
Okay, yeah, because the money gets set aside in some sort of escrow account for them, and then that is used to buy. Yeah, and I always tell my clients, if you're going to do something like that, obviously make sure you could afford the higher payment on the 4th year, right, from the get-go, just so that you're not in trouble. But you make a great point. Things change in a few years. Maybe rates will be lower and you'll be able to lock in something for that 30 years or whatever that's more palatable. But at least in the first couple of years, I think it's a phenomenal idea, using that 3-2-1 in combination with a brand new home that has all these warranties. Great way for you to get into this market now. and not have to sit on the sidelines if you feel like you've been kind of locked out, right? So it's something to consider. And then you mentioned you're working with a builder now. What is that community like, and how can people learn more about it?
Of course, it's the builder is Edward Homes. The community name is Thrive, and we're located in downtown Summerlin. It's exactly walking distance, a couple blocks from the downtown Summerlin. So the location is prime. There are a total of 43 townhomes. There's only 13 left now. They're all 3-story, and they vary from 1,500 square feet all the way to just over 1,800 square feet. All of them have ensuite bathrooms, bedrooms. They're upgraded throughout, primarily in the kitchen, the flooring. So just truly luxury properties and very modern living.
Yeah, and that's prime location right there, downtown Summerlin, very near Red Rock Casino, right?
Correct. I mean, you have everything there, right? Anything you can think of, it's right in there in downtown Summerlin.
I love it. Yeah, and I've actually toured those properties with Alex, and they are very modern. And the location, I mean, you're like, what was it, like 90 seconds from 215? You had it down to the second, yes. Right?
From the moment you parked, I truly wanted to tell the clients I'll feel for that, right? Because one of the things that they're stressed out about is Vegas is growing quickly, so the traffic. So how fast can I get to a freeway? So if you truly tell them a minute and a half and you're on the freeway, you're good, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I wanted to ask you to, I know that's not as common right now, but I know it still happens in some markets. I was actually talking to a friend of ours the other day, and in her area, there are still these bidding wars happening. And people are offering cash, they're offering above asking price. And I wanted to ask you, you hear where some people waive their appraisal contingency and also offer more than the asking price. So let's say if you are financing a home, you're going to get a mortgage, right? You're putting a certain amount of money down and you happen to offer more than the asking price, but the property doesn't appraise. The basically, let's just say the sales price is 600,000. The asking price was 550, right? And the appraiser goes out there, property, sure enough, comes down to 550. Like, what happens with the $50,000 difference? Does the buyer then need to literally come out of pocket with that?
And going back to the negotiation part, if you are truly a professional, then you probably already had that negotiated, right? Before you accepted the offer, because the listing agent and the buyer's agent should have that conversation about the property's true value and discuss what could happen in the event, just like you mentioned, the property doesn't appraise, which does happen often. So in that case, ideal situation is you already predetermine that. Say the property is worth, like you said, 550. They offered 600, but maybe you have it written in there that the buyer will pay up to $25,000 above appraised value, up to a maximum sales price of X. That way, if the property appraises at 575, the buyer wants the house so bad, and there's 3 other buyers that want it, but this buyer is coming in and saying, hey, I will give the additional 25,000 to get you to that 600,000 that I told you I would. Or if the property is appraised at that same 550 number, then this buyer is still saying, hey, you know what? I understand it's worth 550, but here you go. I'm already, per my contract, I put in that I will pay another $25,000 above that appraised value. So he's not stuck, or she's not stuck paying the $50,000 extra. They only have to pay that $25,000 above.
That makes a lot of sense. And again, here's the value of your realtor working on your behalf and negotiating, right? So you're not stuck holding the bag, because, I used to do mortgages, and yeah, if the property doesn't appraise, you're going to get your mortgage based on the appraised value, the lower of the two, appraised value of the sales price, right? So you have to come out of pocket. So it's great that you pre-negotiate that and say, yeah, here's my cap, basically. I'm willing to pay you X amount, even, understanding that it may not appraise, but I wanted that bad, right? And sometimes it makes sense, right? Depending, like, you really want to get into that school district, and you plan on being there a long time, maybe over the long term, that $25,000 over asking is probably not a huge deal, right? So sometimes it makes sense, but it's great to have someone in your corner. So thank you for explaining that. Yeah, because I do get a lot of people asking me about that as well.
One other thing, Louis, that I'll add real quick is also you want to be very careful with the contingency dates. So in this case, you typically do have an appraisal contingency. So you have a certain period of time to negotiate that up front, right? So if the appraisal doesn't come in on time, you have to get an extension, as I'm sure you've worked with in the past, because if you expire that and you haven't set a final price, then the buyer deems to waive the appraisal. And then what they could lose is lose out on their earnest money deposit, which is on average between $5,000 and $10,000.
Yeah.
They could lose out on that. So again, number one, pre-negotiate it. Number two, look out for that date because you're playing with your client's money.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That is a great point. Another thing I wanted to ask you, because I see a lot of negative media around homeowners associations online, like, I've even seen some people that say, hey, never buy in an HOA, right? So I wanted you to just briefly tell us, Vegas is like full of them. It's probably like mostly, right? I think home without HOA is probably the exception. So tell us, what are homeowners associations like? What is their role? And how do you see them as a professional? Are they bad? Should you try to avoid them? Is it okay? Like what purpose do they basically serve?
Well, like you mentioned, most of Las Vegas is in an HOA community. There's, I would say, a large portion of it. So, number one, we have to get used to them, right? Like it's something that's going to be common and won't go away. And we have some of the largest master plans in the country. 5 of the top 50 master plans in all of the USA are here in Southern Nevada. So, number one, we have to play ball with them. Yeah. I'll give you a perfect example. Yesterday, one of the consultations that we had, it was a couple that's moving here from Irvine, California. They are used to having the HOAs, but they were specifically told try not to buy in an HOA here in Las Vegas. However, they didn't know that every HOA is different. Some are very strict, some are very lenient, and it's truly just reading the rules and the bylaws of that community before you proceed. When a buyer is interested in purchasing a property, they're in escrow. The seller, by law, has to provide the buyer with the bylaws of that association. The buyer has 5 days to review them and decide if they still want to move forward.
Is this at the very beginning of the process?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So those 5 days happen, like day 7 comes by, and I, as the buyer, didn't object to anything. I am deemed to have accepted those bylaws.
That is correct. And their concern, for example, was dogs, right? Some HOAs are very strict about the breed of dog or the size of dog. So in this case, the community that they were interested in does not have that kind of restriction. Maybe they won't allow your RV overnight parking outside.
Gotcha.
But dogs are very common, so it's only few HOAs that would have major restrictions on it. So HOAs, personally, I like them. I always give our story to any buyers out of our team. We all live in HOAs. We understand them. We don't have any problems with them, and we actually feel it's a good thing, right? If your community is gated, if your lawns of all of your neighbors need to be manicured and looking good, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just tends to keep up property values. Now, where buyers really don't like it is if they have some sort of side business and, for example, cars, fixing them up in their front yard and right in the backyard, side yard. That's where they're going to have some issues. But I've been doing this for 8.5 years, Louis, and I've only had one cancellation over it. And it was over an RV that the family wanted to have their RV parked on the road for a couple of days while they move in, move out, right? Camping trips and everything. And the HOA said, no, you only get 1 day, take it or leave it. So in that case, it was no problem. You go on to the next community.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So it's just a matter of understanding them. I get why some people might think it's a negative thing. I lived in a home that had an HOA when I first moved to Nevada, but it wasn't a bad thing. Our neighbors were leaving their trash cans out. I guess that particular HOA had some sort of rule where you shouldn't see the garbage cans from the road. So I guess either put them in your garage or put them out back. I think the neighbor, their garage was full of stuff, so they parked their car outside, and they also kept the garbage cans outside. So we used to get letters because somehow the person that was driving by on behalf of the HOA thought it was like our house, So my landlord would call like, "Hey," I'm like, "Look, it's not us. Come by if you want. Like our garbage cans are not shown, But I get it though, right? There's certain things where they upkeep, like you said, security gates, the roads. making sure that there are certain standards for the community. You don't want necessarily somebody like fixing a car, in front of your house or something. So at least they set some sort of standard. So that's good to know. Do you find that the HOA dues, like, do they significantly grow over time? I know it depends on what may happen within the community. I know in Florida right now, the condos are having a huge issue because there's a new mandate from the governor, where, because of one of the condo units that there was a collapse of a building a few years ago. And now, there's some new requirements for capital reserves and inspections. So a lot of HOAs are like, hey, we need to raise our dues. But I think aside from those major events, do you find them, like, over time, do they go up significantly?
Here in Southern Nevada, they have not. It's been very minimal, and really it has been because I review the statement for the community I live in, and it's really keep up with the rising cost of inflation, right? The gardening, the watering, the systems, the equipment that they need to purchase. That's really the only time that it's gone up. To give you an example, it's gone up $30 over 10 years. So I don't think that it's major, and really we haven't seen major and drastic increases. The highest communities, highest priced HOA communities, of course, are the guard gated communities, and also Lake Las Vegas we see that has higher HOAs. Other than that, I mean, they're pretty standard. Sometimes laughable for California clients when they come here and see, it's $100, $200, right? They're used to paying $1,000 in California. Yeah. Here it's, I've seen it $50, $70, $100, $200 with a lot of amenities. So it really hasn't been a big deal for us.
Yeah, if you come from California or New York to Las Vegas, a lot of those prices were like, wow, this is like really affordable. I remember when I first moved here, my rent went down like $600 and my square footage went up significantly. I even had a bedroom that I didn't even use. Like, I had so much room, 2-car garage and washer and dryer. Like, all these things that we take for granted here are really luxuries elsewhere. Like, wow. Parking and wash and dry. Like, it really, it's not that common like in New York City, So yeah, it's pretty interesting how things are different across the country. Well, thank you so much. I think this has been extremely valuable and informational for our audience. Where can we find you online? I'm going to share all your links in the show notes, but somebody wants to reach out to you or follow you on social media, where can we find you?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and our website. My Instagram handle is at Alex Vazquez Vegas. It's V as in Victor, AZQUEZ. On Facebook, I'm under Alex Vazquez or Alex Vazquez Team. And our website, which is in the process of being remodeled, it'll be live next week, is alexvazquezteam.com.
Got it. Awesome. And I'll be sure to put a link in the show notes. And last question, what, we won't hold you to it, but as a professional, what is the sense of what do you think may happen in the future in terms of interest rates, home prices, just basically based on what you're seeing currently in the environment?
So what our professional lender partners are mentioning to us that they do foresee rate decreases, which is good news for all of us, that they're expecting one more potentially before the end of the year and then up to 2 or 3 next year. So we are seeing the interest rates start to decline, which again is really encouraging news for a lot of buyers that 1%, a few $100s a month could make or break the deal. So we're anxious and hopeful, expecting that interest rates continue on a downward trend.
Yeah, that should bring a lot more buyers to the market, right?
Correct. What we're being told, Luis, from the mortgage professionals is that every percentage that the interest rates come down, well over 1 million people can afford to purchase more homes.
Yeah, so that's a huge difference. Urgent. And also, I think it's going to bring more sellers to the market too, because I know that a lot of people that locked in those low rates are not trying to sell right now because they're like, man, I'm going to get rid of my nice low rate to jump on a 6.5. I can't do that.
You're absolutely right. You bring up a fantastic point. Where if you're a seller sitting on 2.99, 3.5, why would you give that up to go pay 6.5 currently? So you're right. Buyers are on the sideline too, and they have a lot of equity, right? So they can make moves. They can get that bigger house with the pool, right, or in the community they want to, but they're just nervous because financially it doesn't make sense to make such a big increase in their mortgage payment. The average Las Vegas payment right now is hovering around $3,000, which is tough to digest.
Absolutely. Unless you're coming from LA, then you're like, oh, this is great.
Oh, that was my apartment, my 1-bedroom apartment in
Yeah,
LA.
1 bedroom. Yeah, freaking studio. Yeah, it's crazy. Thank you so much, Alex. Again, I wanted to ask you one last question. Kind of put you in the hot seat, but it's a good question. Basically, imagine that you are in an elevator ride with a complete stranger, and it's going to be a short ride, maybe 30 seconds or so. They're never going to see you again. And they didn't listen to this episode, so they don't know to find you on social media or visit alexvazquezteam.com. What are some things that you would share with them if they ask you, like, hey, man, what have you learned throughout your life? What are some principles you live by? Any advice you can give me just about life in general that you would like to share?
Well, life and in business, real estate handled properly is about one of the safest investments on the planet, right? And just the power of working with the right people, whether in your personal life or in your professional life, makes all the difference, right? You are the average of the 4 to 5 people you hang out with the most. They end up influencing you in your life and your decisions. So it's truly surrounding yourself with a good group of people and that have your best interest at heart.
Yeah, I love it. And people say that even your net worth is the average of the 5 people you hang out with too. So I think our parents were right? When they were like, hey, show me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are.
We're both Latinos. My parents from the very beginning, I can remember being very, very young, 5, 6 years old, and hearing it. Cuentas claras, amistades largas, right? Just the clear accounts and the long friendships that can arise. And I see that now, right? I'm now 40 years old, but I look back and I'm like, wow, that was also one of the best advice I've received in my life, is just truly being clear communications and in accounting, finances, to making sure that you have no problems.
Absolutely. No, I love it, man. Thank you so much for sharing this, man. I can't wait for people to listen to this. I think it's going to make a lot of things clear with the just clarifying the new rules and all the tips that you gave as well. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next episode. As always, if you have any questions, send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.